All right, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for coming and being a part of this follow up to General Convention from the Mississippi Deputation. Let's start off, as our bishop suggested, with an opening prayer. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Almighty and ever living God, source of all wisdom and understanding, be present with those who take counsel in your church for the renewal of your mission. Teach us in all things to seek first your honor and glory. Guide us to perceive what is right, and grant us both the courage to pursue it and the grace to accomplish it. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. All right, everybody, again, welcome and thanks for tuning in to this presentation. The Mississippi Deputation to General Convention. We've convened today to keep the diocese informed about what happened this summer at convention, and then also to satisfy the canonical requirement for us as a deputation to report to you, the diocese. My name is CJ Metters, and I was honored to be the chair of the deputation for the 81st General Convention. And I'm going to give you all a quick PowerPoint. We're going to go through a couple of things on today's agenda. All right, so I want to give everybody an overview of Gen Con, and that's a shout out to Bishop Sage and his lingo for General Convention. Share with you the main event of the convention and not tell you yet, right, to raise the excitement level. Point you to some resources for further study should you wish to. And then also give everybody a chance to provide some takeaways from their experience at convention, whether that be from the committee that they worked in or basically from just their general experience of convention. And then finally, I'll open it up for Q&A, and I'll give you some instructions on how to do that when we get there. Just to let you know, this video is being recorded and is going to be available for wider consumption by the diocese. So the first thing to say is that General Convention was held. It was the 81st General Convention held from June 23rd to 28th in the beautiful town of Louisville, Kentucky. Convention was held at the Convention Center there in downtown Louisville. And every General Convention consists of the meeting of two houses, the House of Bishops and the House of Deputies. Each of these houses meets separately and considers legislation on its own, except in the case where we had joint sessions, and those were mostly held for special presentations to both houses. One awesome example of that, just to give you real quick, was when the newly formed missionary diocese of Navajo land was presented. We all came together to cheer that newly formed missionary diocese. The Mississippi Deputation of General Convention consisted of 4 deputies and 3 alternates from the clergy order, 4 deputies and 4 alternates from the lay order, and then, of course, Bishop Sage, and then the bishop-elect, Dorothy Wells, now, of course, the 11th bishop, Dorothy Wells. And just to give you those names of the people that were there among us in the clergy order as deputies were Reverend Ann Maxwell, Reverend Canon Ponder, the Reverend Elizabeth Wheatley Jones, and me, CJ Metters. And then also, and as the alternates, we have the Reverend Stephen Kidd, the Reverend Annie Elliott, and the Reverend Elizabeth Malfers. And in the lay order, our deputies were Tom Fortner, Margaret McClarty, sorry, Margaret, I misspelled your name there, Catherine McCormick, and Ed Sisson. And then our alternates were Katie Pacelli, Lee Grady, Robbie Fisher, and Susan Lee. So when you see them next time, thank them for going on behalf of the diocese and doing this work. A typical day at convention, just to walk you through real quick, a typical day, it included usually 2 legislative sessions, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. And in between those sessions, we met as a deputation and shared lunch together at our suite in the Galt House, which is a historic hotel in downtown Louisville there right next to the Ohio River. There were some evening legislative sessions as well, including one Episco Disco session where we had glow sticks and all kinds of fun things. And then also there was a revival hosted one evening by presiding Bishop Curry that was held at the I can't remember, KFC Center, right? It was I think where the Cardinals play there. So that was a fun night for those that attended. And then also we enjoyed some of the amenities, of course, of downtown Louisville. And myself and some other undisclosed members of the deputation successfully completed the Urban Bourbon Trail. And we have the t-shirt to prove it. All right. And then, of course, I want to tell you about the main event of convention. It was definitely the election of the newly elected presiding bishop, Sean Rowe. He was elected as the 28th presiding bishop just after one ballot in the House of Bishops, and his election was confirmed by an overwhelming majority in the House of Deputies. Bishop Rowe currently serves as the bishop of, well, he's going to, I think he is consecrated in the fall, if I remember correctly. But he currently serves as the Bishop of Northwestern Pennsylvania and serves as the provisional bishop of Western New York. And he is known for being the youngest person ever elected as bishop at age 49. He also broke other records as the youngest Episcopal priest in the U.S., ordained at 24. So I'm sorry. So he's presiding bishop at 49, bishop at 32, and back to priest at 24. So at every stage, he broke the record. All right. His leadership style, we can describe it as hands-on, strong emphasis on strategic thinking and readiness to embrace change. From listening to his message, he wants for the national church to trickle down resources and strategy to each diocese, where the diocese can also trickle down to each parish. And he wants us to, do the work of looking at what are the old structures in the church that no longer serve us. And he's particularly skilled to do that work as a visionary and a strategic thinker in the church. He's known for his deep faith and commitment to addressing issues within the church and society, including environmental concerns, inequality, and conflict. And I would say, and I think everybody would agree, his election comes at a significant moment as the church is looking for answers to all of those issues and to the future, the structure of the church, and what it means to be in the national church and how it serves down to the parish. All right, and then for further study, I just wanted to show you all a couple of resources. And the first is this summary of actions, and I'm going to see if this will work if I click on it. Yay, it works like it's supposed to. It's this summary of actions from the General Convention. I just show you this as a document that will help kind of get your mind around all the things that were done. Here at the bottom, you can see there were 396 total resolutions. You can see that 193 of those were concurred. That means adopted by both houses. And you can go down from there and see every how the breakdown went for each resolution. How many were just adopted by the House of Bishops, only adopted by the House of Deputies, and so on. And then it gets into, starting there at A001, it gives you all of those resolutions, all 396 there. You can walk through all of them if you'd like to and see the final status of what happened, their convention. So just like it says, it's a summary of the actions. You can see the title of each resolution and you can see the final status. But if you want to dig deeper, let me go back. If you want to dig deeper, there's this wonderful thing called the V-binder, and we all got very familiar with the V-binder while we were at convention. So the V-binder allows you to get a little bit more detail on each and every resolution and the actions. that were taken by convention. I want to show you this because this is helpful. If you hit these resolution button here, this resolution button, and then you hit committee, it does the nice thing of breaking down each resolution by committee. So where you can see, for example, in governance and structure, if I hit that, it will show me each and every resolution that was passed by General Convention from this committee. And if I wanted to, I could come down here and view. I can even see the text as it was proposed and amended. It can show me all the changes that went along the way before it came to its final status here. So this is, yeah, a helpful resource. And again, you can break it down by committee. And this is in the vBinder. I'm going to follow up with this meeting and make sure that everybody has access when we post this to all of these links. But if you were just to Google search General Convention vBinder, you'll get there real quick. The next one is just the General Convention website. And you can take your time and go through all of this. It's got a drop down for the 81st General Convention. And then all these documents on the governance, all of the bodies of convention. There are interim bodies which meet in between conventions. So you can see them and you can see the work that happens in between each convention. So there's all kinds of information just in this general website. I won't go through all of it. But I will just point you to that resource so that in your free time, you can do further research. And then the last thing that I wanted to show you was this new House of Deputies website, which is a little bit easier to explore. It's a nicer interface, recent news in there. There's a podcast if you wanted to use a podcast to catch up on the work that happened in those interim bodies, including this website also includes a page from General Convention with a little bit, again, it's just a little bit nicer to look at and gives you these important links and links to past conventions and all those sort of things. If you'll just put your questions there in the Q&A section, and we'll get to them after we hear from our deputies and alternates. We're going to hear from them. They're going to let us know a couple of takeaways, some of the work that they did in their area of study, or things from their general interest that they took away. So I'm going to hand it over appropriately to Bishop Wells first to give us some of her reflections from convention.
Thank you, CJ. I will tell everybody first that this was my first General Convention. I'd never actually been to General Convention before this. And I'm going to use this moment as a plug to suggest to folks that if you have never served as a deputy and you think you would like to dig in and know more about what it means to be part of the work that General Convention does, think about standing for election. Think about being part of that work in the church, because it's vital and it's important. I wish I had done it before, but I'm glad that I had the chance to do it now, and had my actual seating in the House of Bishops, had voice but no vote, since I hadn't actually been ordained at the time. But it was fascinating to see the work that is done and how it is executed, and I commend this work to everyone. Think about what it would mean to actually be a part of it and see what happens. My reflections on General Convention are really probably a little bit different, because I'm reflecting on General Convention as a first timer, with the things that stood out to me about what we do as church and what that time together meant to me to watch. And one of the things that truly meant a lot to me was to see the beginning of unity and streamlining of the way that we consider the work that we do. We had two clusters of dioceses that came together to form a single diocese. So the diocese of Eastern and Western Michigan came together to form the Diocese of the Great Lakes, and the diocese of Eau Claire, Fond du Lac, and Milwaukee joined together again to become the Diocese of Wisconsin. And for us to be able to think about church as not being so siloed, but being this large body that is all doing the same work, all committed to the same work of caring for God's people in the world. And how do we do that effectively and well? Seeing these dioceses come together meant a lot to me, and I was really, really glad, excited about seeing that kind of unity in the church. And I think the other thing that really, really stood out to me was our recognition of the church in Navajo land as a missionary diocese. My understanding of the history is that the Episcopal Church first created a mission in Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah in 1978. And the church has been working in that land, recognizing the Navajo folks, allowing them to know tradition in their own language, which of course is historic for us. I mean, that's part of the underpinnings of everything that we are, is being able to speak in our native tongue. And it's really exciting to see them being able to incorporate not only in English but also in Navajo, their language, their worship, and us recognizing them as a missionary diocese after all this time, and validating the work that they're doing with creation care, with love of their people, with trying to create more of a sense of unity. That was really exciting to see. So I was thrilled to be part of that. And I guess the other thing that excited me about General Convention was seeing the youth presence at General Convention. I wish we had a better name for it than youth presence. I'll be the first one to say that the name youth presence sounds a little odd, but to me, to my ears. But we had young people there who were actively involved in the work of convention and interested in the future of this church that is their church. They were vocal, they were participating. It was not just an activity. They were really part of what was happening at General Convention. They led us in a march against gun violence. It warmed my heart to know that we do have young people who love this church and love what we're doing. And I hear people talking about young people as our future. They're our present. This isn't just about them being our future. They're our present. And for us to acknowledge them, to give them an opportunity to be full participants and to be heard, and for us to take away the things that they're teaching us is just really important. So it was a great convention. I was glad to be there. One of 3 women who were bishops elect, who were on the floor of the House of Bishops. So that was really exciting too. Really good.
All right. Thank you, Bishop Wells. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate those reflections, and obviously glad to have you on board in a more official capacity now, and all of the bishop elects, right, more on board. So let's see. The next person that we're going to have is Canon Brian Ponder, who's going to tell us about his work with the legislative committee on Title III. Brian, over to you.
All right. Thanks, CJ. Hope y'all are doing well. It's a joy to be together tonight and to be amongst some friends here at the Allen House. Title III began its work as a legislative committee earlier in the year, as did most all of the other legislative committees. It's a committee that typically would have around 20 or so resolutions for consideration. And this year, this triennium, we got a break. There were actually 6 resolutions that came before us that we worked on in various subcommittees and going back and forth. And I'd like to, I think, speak to the legislative committee process, which you don't see often unless you're in the midst of it, even though you can sign up in these new formats for Zoom presence. But that is one very intentional way in which the larger general convention, at least in my experience, comes into a smaller community of people who are working for a common mission and purpose, though it be legislative, and building relationships and deepening conversations and considerations. So I really would like to hold up that piece of the work of General Convention. And I could speak a lot about the larger, my larger impressions of the larger gathering. But I really valued, in particular, the work of this committee. So Title III focuses on the ministry, particularly of bishops, deacons, and priests. So particularly the ordained ministry. And that's not to the exclusion of the ministry of the laity, but we really did see in the 6 resolutions with which we dealt a focus on ordained ministry. So, or professed religious life. So the 6 that we dealt with, I won't go through the numbers, but one was creating an official list of recognized religious orders and Christian communities that really focused on a way to formalize relationships within the Episcopal Church of what it means to be a religious community, what it takes not only to be recognized, but to be considered fully viable and vibrant, and offering a way legislatively to maintain a list of what those organizations may be and how people may become more and more connected to those various committees. Another resolution that I really won't spend a whole lot of time on was just kind of a cleanup effort to bring into conformity some of the previous or other areas of the canons, Constitution and canon. So it was really just kind of language based and talking particularly about conformity, and dealt with some of the particulars of the ways in which consents are gathered for in ordination processes. You know, whether or not there has to be a single testimonial, or if there can be various testimonials that are then combined into one to make the overall testimony. Really in recognition, I think, of the increased nature of telecommunications and the way that we meet electronically these days. Another offered an opportunity within the canons, particularly Canon Title 3.1.3, to neutralize some of the language so that it conformed better with revisions from 2022. So rather than focusing on the orders of bishop, priests, and deacons equally available and applicable to men and women, to just simply say all persons, which was kind of one piece that was not, it was an oversight from 2022. Considering also the General Board of Examining Chaplains and how we go about not just the nature of testing candidates for ministry, but raising up folks who can do the work of examining and reviewing the materials. This was brought actually as a resolution by the Standing Committee on Nominations, recognizing that particularly in this biennium, but for the past several triennia, it's been very difficult to fill the Board of Examining Chaplains with both folks who are qualified, not just academically, but pastorally, and kind of sharing in those various areas to examine those who would stand for ordination. Two resolutions that I'd really like to hold out and speak to are D023 in support of the Association for Episcopal Deacons. In this was probably the resolution that got the most emphasis and got the most feedback in our time as a legislative committee. And it was really both a joy and eye-opening to hear from the Order of Deacons by their presence and witness and testimony to our committee. And in a good bit of that testimony, hearing from, firsthand from deacons, a call and an expectation to be realized more and more as a full order of ministry and full ordination in and of itself. So this resolution called for the setting aside of up to $200,000 within the triennial budget to focus on the ministry of the Association for Episcopal Deacons, to support deacons in their work, to help this organization that is focused on training and formation in particular, to streamline and reimagine its own structure from not just a business perspective, but a way that they are resourcing our deacons across the church, our 3,400 deacons across the church. So I'd commend you that D023 for your reading and review after this. And then the other, which got a lot of conversation back and forth, was the potential for raising the clergy mandatory retirement age to 75. And this centered on the various conversations centered on not only the clergy crisis that we're in, having not enough clergy across the church, but also what mandatory retirement says as far as ageism, what it means to consider this resolution in the context of the ministries of the diaconate and the presbyterate, as opposed to also the episcopacy, and more. So this resolution was sent back for further review and study. It was passed, but it also asked for an examination of common languages between the canons and the language used within materials and publications by Church Pension Group, what raising the age to 75 might do in terms of the pension fund, and more. So hodgepodge isn't the right word, but there were a lot of considerations here. And I will say, as far as the legislative committee work, I got a really good taste in this first experience on an actual appointment to a legislative committee about the give and take across the wider church and the conversations and what it means really to live into community and communication as well. and not always needing to speak, but doing a lot of listening. So it was a holy experience, a good one, and I commend General Convention to those of you who might consider standing for election.
All right, thank you, Ken and Ponder, for that update on Title III, and then also mentioning the service on legislative committees, which anyone who serves as a deputy, just deputy, can apply to serve on a legislative committee. All right, next I'm going to go to alternate Robbie Fisher. She's going to tell us about her experience as a first-time deputy.
Hello, everybody. My name is Robbie Fisher, and I was lay alternate number 6 with this group. And in addition to the substantive reporting that we're providing to the diocese in this Zoom session, I just wanted to give just an interesting explanation of what it's really like, what the experience is like to be at council for anyone watching who may be considering it. As Bishop has encouraged, and others have in this Zoom have encouraged everyone to consider that. It really is a unique and very rewarding experience to be a part of this. Many on the deputation were repeat attendees, which is very valuable for that institutional historical knowledge and knowing the process and really digging in. For someone like me, this was the first time, I think I was just sort of, my eyes were real big and I was just absorbing all of it. And it was a very invigorating and exciting experience. But just to back up a little bit, so I was elected as an alternate in annual council of the diocese in 2023. And then after that, after the deputation was elected, then we all began meeting pretty regularly and increasingly regularly as we approached General Convention and Synod, which was held about a month before General Convention. So there's a lot of prep work, there's a lot of study, there's participation, and to the extent that you want to, on committees and involvement. There's a whole lot of material. It's very, very well planned and well provided study in advance of going to convention. Once you get there, the deputies are everyone has credentials. The deputies are assigned little iPads, which are for voting. When the alternates were there and able to be there and on the floor, many of the deputies were able to transfer credentials out so that we could all have a chance to experience some time on the floor as voting parts of our deputation, which is very neat. The same highlights that the bishop and others have mentioned with the election of the presiding bishop, the acceptance of Navajo land, in addition to, I believe, Cuba and Micronesia were also added, were really very moving and interesting parts of the time that I was able to be on the floor and to see. So that was really neat. And then just in addition to that, just the camaraderie of the deputation. I mean, we had a suite where we all ate lunch together. Many people at nights, often corralled by Katie Pacelli, were going out to eat at great places and meeting up. And everyone, I know that I felt very, very welcomed and embraced. And so I really appreciate the rest of the deputation for sort of taking the newcomers under their wing and making us feel all a part of it. Annie provided great tie-dye shirts for us, which we wore on camp day. We wore our Camp Bretton Green tie-dye t-shirts. That was really neat. That was the day, one of the days that I was there. So that was very cool. So it's a lot of work and it's a lot of study, but it's also a lot of fun. And I really would encourage anyone who's out there listening who may not have been a part of this to consider maybe putting your name in for a nominee in the future. It's really rewarding, and it brought me much closer to everyone in the diocese and the deputation. So that's my experience. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Robbie. As a fellow first timer, I agree with everything you said, and I thank you for bringing in those details of the fellowship, and the study and the work we did, but also the fun. So thank you for that. All right, so next up we've got senior deputy, which means I'll let him tell you how many conventions he's been to. But senior deputy Ed Sisson, he's going to tell us about his work with it was U.S. policy on that legislative committee.
Thank you, CJ. Good evening. I'm Ed Sisson. I'm a communicant of St. Peter's in Oxford, and I was privileged to serve as a deputy to the 81st General Convention. And I also want to take time to thank the delegates to the Diocesan Annual Council in 2003, who gave me the opportunity to do this. One of the things that I love about General Convention is the human and the theological diversity. The Eucharist just doesn't look like or sound like it does at St. Peter's on a Sunday morning. And I mean that in a good way. And I'm always encouraging my fellow parishioners to attend General Convention as a visitor, even if it's just for one day, to experience the church gathered and what the church really looks like and sounds like. A second thing I love, some people would find strange perhaps, is the work of the legislative committees. Hearing testimony of Episcopalians from around the world who are testimonies on issues about which they're all passionate. Perfecting the resolutions which come in from interim bodies, bishops, dioceses, and deputies, and then crafting new and substitute resolutions. I think that's fun. At the 81st General Convention, I served on the Legislative Committee on Social Justice and U.S. Policy. The committee heard testimony and perfected 21 resolutions and recommended either their adoption or their adoption as amended. The House of Deputies adopted all of these either by a vote on the floor or by adoption of what's called the consent calendar. Now, the House of Bishops, in their wisdom, failed to concur on one of these resolutions. It was a resolution advocating for restorative justice, which is great and fine, and making a moral commitment to the abolition of prisons and policing. I suspect that's why it didn't was not adopted by the General Convention. Other issues addressed by the resolutions to my committee included what I would call religious freedom, the continuing high rate of violence, the right to clean, potable water, and there were series addressing various inequalities in housing, in access to medical care, and what I'm going to call here the freedom of positive self-representation. Others dealt with regulations or support of the regulation of generative artificial intelligence, which we hear a lot about today, immigration issues, and advocating for an increased research on the prevention of pedestrian traffic fatalities. We do real good about protecting people in the car, but not quite so well on protecting people who are walking down the street or trying to cross the street. Since time is limited, I want to address just one of these categories, and that's the category of violence. And I want to specifically talk about gun violence. Of course, as Mississippians, we live in a society where guns are quite important. As a setup, I want to tell you that deaths by guns are down, and that's good. They're down from a 2021 peak, when more people were killed in the United States by firearms in that 1 year than died from enemy action during the whole of the Vietnam War. Now, I'm not old enough to remember those times and the traumatic scenes coming out of Vietnam, the trauma for the individuals who participated actively and the people back home. We don't quite get that much reaction to deaths by firearms. But although they're down, firearm deaths are still too high. One resolution called for gun violence to be declared a national health crisis, freeing funds for epidemiological study of gun deaths and injuries. At one point, the Congress forbid the CDC to conduct those kinds of epidemiological studies. And also funding for gun violence prevention programs. Shortly after the General Convention, the Surgeons General did indeed declare gun violence a national health crisis. So we were on the same wavelength with the Surgeons General. Another resolution called for the reinstatement of the bans on the sale to civilians of assault weapons, high-capacity magazines, and bump stocks. As one committee member pointed out, you know, if you have an assault weapon but you don't have a high-capacity magazine, it kind of limits how many rounds that you can fire. A third resolution advocated for the registration of all firearms, the licensing of gun sellers, buyers, and users. And then finally, a fourth resolution addressed gun violence and called for the safe storage of all firearms. Trigger guards are cheap. If the actions of all these resolutions and those passed by previous general conventions were realized, there would still be firearm deaths, but there would be far fewer. Or it would perhaps be better to say that more individuals were going home to their loved ones tonight. A child might be alive because he was not able to commit suicide or die in an accident with his daddy's unlocked gun. But Mama, he ain't reporting. He's done gone to preaching. So I'll say amen and move on. I would be pleased to address any of the other resolutions from the Committee on Social Justice and U.S. Policy in the question and answer period. Thank you all again for allowing me to participate in the 81st General Convention.
All right, thank you, Ed, and thank you for preaching a little bit. In addition to reporting, and just and you're being modest too. You mentioned bump stocks. The reason that term is in there is because Ed made an amendment to that resolution and got it passed on the floor of convention, which was one of the highlights. It was one of the few times that maybe the only time somebody from the deputation got up on the floor. And it was pretty substantive. So thank you for your work, Ed. And tell me how many conventions you've done as a senior deputy?
Thank you, CJ, for your words. And this is the 8th time I've been. First time I went was when Gene Robinson, we voted to elect Gene Robinson as bishop.
Yeah, obviously a big convention there, a good one to start on. All right, so the next person, we're going to switch from U.S. policy, social justice and U.S. policy to social justice and international policy with Mr. Tom Fortner, who's going to let us know about that work. Thank you, Tom.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, and it's good to be here with all of you. And it was great to be in Louisville at General Convention this year. It was a lot of fun, and you were represented by a deputation that had a lot of fun together. So rest assured, we took advantage of every possible opportunity. I was on the International Policy and Social Justice Committee, and our legislative committee started meeting, I guess, about 3 months before General Convention, and it was a very kind of international committee. The chairperson of our committee was a priest who was living in Munich, Germany, and we had other members on the committee from pretty much all over the world. So it was real interesting, and it was interesting to see what people were focused on. And we met about, I'd say, once every 10 days to once every 2 weeks by Zoom, leading up to General Convention. And we had a lot of resolutions to consider. Without a doubt, what I'll talk about tonight is the area of the world that we were most focused on was the Middle East, having to do with the Israelite-Palestinian conflict and what's going on over there. And there were, by far, the majority of the resolutions presented to our legislative committee focused on that area and on that conflict, and what the church wanted to say about that or do about that, or what was even possible to say or do about that. There was, just real quickly, the way this works is we, as a legislative committee, would vote on, we would debate and talk about a resolution. We might amend it. We might change the language in it somewhat to by unanimous consent on our committee. And if we voted that out, we might. And on our committee, there were 3 bishops also. So there were priests, lay people, and the 3 bishops. And so our committee would vote by houses on whether or not what to do with the resolution. So there was uniform consent that, a uniform feeling that something needed to be said about it. There was a lot of discussion about what words should or shouldn't be used, and you know, one good thing about this is that you can have this, you know, you can go to a Zoom committee meeting, and then you can get off that meeting and you can start communicating with other members of our delegation. Ed had been on this committee several times before, so when I had questions, I'd get off my committee meeting and I'd call Ed, and we'd talk about it, and we'd disagree about it sometimes, and sometimes we wouldn't disagree about it. But it was somebody who had some experience that I could talk to and get some advice from. And that's one really good thing about our delegation. Our delegation tends to be, we all try to talk to each other and discuss the issues that we have. By far, the biggest issue had to do with the Palestinian-Israelite conflict. And there were several resolutions that were passed out onto the floor and that were debated and passed. If the House of Deputies passed a resolution, that resolution would then go to the House of Bishops, where the House of Bishops might pass it, they might not. They might send it back, make some changes in it, amend it, and send it back, in which case we would have to debate on the floor of the House of Deputies whether or not we wanted to accept it as it is, as it's been amended, or whether we don't, and whether we want to re-amend it or and send it back to the House of Bishops. And so it's very similar to the United States Congress, to be honest with you. I mean, and there's the same kind of give and take between people. We did end up passing resolutions calling for a cessation of hostilities in the Middle East, calling for a ceasefire, calling for the release of hostages. And I'll tell you where we all got hung up, both in my committee, in the House of Deputies and the House of Bishops, were the proposed use of two words. One word was apartheid, labeling Israel an apartheid government, and the other one was describing what's going on there as genocide. The two words that were at issue were genocide and apartheid. The House of Deputies, the House of Bishops took one of those resolutions, or both of them. The House of Bishops removed the words apartheid, and I believe they removed the word genocide from those resolutions. They came back to the House of Deputies, to the committee, to the legislative committee, to discuss those amendments by the House of Bishops. The legislative committee of the House of Deputies voted to send it back to the floor of the House of Deputies for debate and to put those two words back in. And it got to the floor, and there are hundreds of people in the House of Deputies. I don't know the exact number. And there's a limited amount of time to speak. But what ultimately happened is the House of Deputies decided, I think there was a general concern that if we refused to accept the amendments, that the legislation would die, and we wouldn't we wouldn't be saying anything. And the House of Deputies voted pretty overwhelmingly to accept the amendments made by the House of Bishops and pass the resolution without the two words that the legislative committee had wanted in there in the first place. And that's just part of legislation. So there was, but it was a fascinating experience to watch that give and take. It was like politics, there was a real give and take, but it was a lot more friendly than the politics that we appear to be practicing these days. So it was a good experience. There were other resolutions that spoke very positively about immigration issues and some protection for immigrants. There were some issues about responsible travel to the Holy Land. And those resolutions did in fact pass. So there were some legislative successes with the committee. But I'm sure that unfortunately, these are the kind of issues that will continue to come up with this committee. So it was a fascinating experience for me. And I thank the council for electing me to go there. And I do, like everyone else on here, I commend the experience to all of us in this diocese, and would hope that other members of our diocese would stand for election to become a delegate to the General Convention. It's a great experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. And I want to say a special thank you. You were in that committee that had a bunch of 7 a.m. meetings because of all those hot button issues. So thank you for your commitment and getting up and going to those committee meetings. Next up, I'm going to go to Reverend Ann Maxwell, and she's going to tell us a little bit about the prayer book and liturgy. I'm going to spoil it a little bit. We do not have a new prayer book. So just to make sure, lower the anxiety there. Go ahead, Ann.
Hey, you took it away. So Sean Rowe, when he gave his conversation right after his election to be our presiding bishop, he said that the world around us is always changing and God is always calling us into the unknown. And as a result, we should really hold our current structure lightly and allow the Holy Spirit in. And I think for all of the detail and sometimes what feels like chaos at General Convention, I do think that's one of the things that happens, because we come to convention having looked up these resolutions ahead of time and had formed some sorts of opinions, and then people start talking and discussing and passing it back and forth in houses, and things get changed. And you get to hear all across the church, and not just, continental USA, but how people in Cuba are dealing with this, or how people in other parts of the world are dealing with some of these issues. And that is what's really exciting to me about being there. And that often comes through in liturgy for two reasons. One, because liturgy is so daggone important to all of us. And we have very definite ideas about how it should sound and look. And so there's a lot of conversation. The resolutions for the committee this time were 30 odd resolutions. There were a lot of resolutions about changing who's on the lectionary, taking a holy person off, putting a holy person on for various reasons. There were also some tweaks to some hymn text that got sent to a committee to review in the meantime about whether some of the language needed to change in that. There were exploring liturgies to address a grieving history of slavery. There were several on marriage rights. We've been working on that for a while. And so some of these were kind of coming back to General Convention saying, okay, we've played with this for a while. Now we're going to put this one out there as a trial use, and it will come back in 3 years. Part of the discussion in that is that we are not looking to come up with another hardbound book in the same way. But now that we've expanded to include so many liturgies that are available through, kind of electronic means, it really opens up how many things could be offered as authorized liturgies and how many could be authorized as trial use liturgies, because nothing ever gets just taken right off the bat. You have to try it out and tweak it, and then try it out and tweak it. And then finally it goes through a couple of conventions. So it takes a long time from the time that somebody says, hey, we should have a new way of doing this, to the time that we're actually can use it on Sunday morning. In that process, one of the things that was authorized for trial use is a revision of Eucharistic Prayer C. And the prior Bishop Wells, gave me permission to use it at the cathedral. So we've been using it for August to be able to give feedback to the committee and say, all right, we've prayed this for a season, and here's what it sounds like and feels like to us. And here are the things we liked or didn't like about it. And that's one of the things that's helpful in the committee tweaking to send it forth for further changes. Another thing that has come up a couple of times has been whether we change the language about who we invite to receive the Eucharist in a service. And I find this really fascinating, because the conversation is between some strict guidelines to say you have to be baptized in order to receive the Eucharist, and that needs to be very clear. The House of Bishops almost always says yes to that. And House of Deputies is always bringing up something about hospitality, and can we soften that language, or can we do something different? And one of the things we've come to is that so many churches across the country do very different things, and we would rather not get into a debate and finalize the language in such a way that prohibits people from exploring this. And the canon's very clear. I do want to say that the canon is currently clear, but people keep trying to change it. And the House of Bishops has not been willing to take that further, but nor have they been willing to say, we'll never change it. And so we have that wonderful phrasing that we get at General Convention, which is, it was concluded by take no further action, which just means it can kind of die a quiet death. And sometimes that's kind of how those things need to go from convention to convention. I think there were changes in Good Friday text to consider whether some of the things we're saying are anti-Semitic or not. So there's some things floating around about that. And the marriage rights I told you about. And there's some creation care language to be tested out in our baptismal covenant. I think those are probably the highlights. But like I said, there were over 30 of them. So feel free to look at the V-binder. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you, Ann. Appreciate you getting that work together for us. All right. And then our last presenter from the deputation is going to be our alternate, Lee Grady, and she's going to share with us a special prayer. Was it crafted at convention or past the convention? Tell us about it, Lee.
Okay, so this came out of Ann's committee on prayer book, liturgy, and music. But I was on the floor when it was adopted, and it was very moving to me. So I wanted to speak about it. This is Resolution C032, and it was on Legislative Calendar Day 5, which was the 27th of June. This is a resolution dealing with the children who were sent to residential and boarding schools back in the 1900s. And I don't know the history well enough to know how complicit the Episcopal Church was, but clearly the Episcopal Church didn't do enough to stop the practice. So this was crafted by some Native Americans, and the resolution expressed remorse for the part the Episcopal Church played in the suffering of those Indigenous children. It presented a prayer that I will read at the end. It encouraged the use of this prayer across the Episcopal Church, which I think is what gives me the permission to read it, since I am not Native American. It directs the Standing Committee on Liturgy and Music and the Indigenous communities to determine an annual remembrance date and put it on the church calendar. The resolution also asks the same group to develop lessons and collects and liturgical resources commemorating the lives of these children, and also to include this commemoration in lesser feasts and fasts. So that being said, I would like to read this prayer, which is called A Prayer to Remember the Innocents. The Lord be with you. Dear Lord, Almighty God, we pray for all Indigenous children who are in residential and boarding schools in Canada and the United States. Some died there. We ask that you give assurance to their descendants that their souls are with you and their ancestors. Some survived there. We ask that you give your healing grace to all who endured hardship while there and are still struggling with those memories. Lastly, we ask you to help us guard our children against harm in this world. All this we ask in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, now and forever. Amen.
Thank you, Lee. Appreciate you sharing that prayer with us. And that moment was powerful on the floor of convention for sure. All right. I'm not seeing any other questions in the Q&A, but while we wait, I wanted to give Margaret McClarty also a chance. She's going to tell us a little bit about the worship at convention. And please submit a question if you got one in the meantime.
Great. All right. I am one of those people who started going to general convention 8 general conventions ago as a volunteer. So that is one of the best ways you can get involved. You don't have to go initially as a legislative member of the deputation. So I have been involved in the worship committee for a number of years. And I had the privilege to continue to do that again this year. So that was very helpful. It is powerful to be in a room of thousands of Episcopalians and have the services that we're so used to, and you know the language and you know what's getting ready to happen, and then it all comes out in French or it all comes out in Spanish, and it's extremely meaningful. You see, and Native American is, we have a lot of different languages and ways to participate in the worship. So that's one of the things. The other thing that I want to talk about, and it was mentioned earlier, we do have a very close, tight-knit deputation. And so the deputation does meet for lunch in our room every day, but that in the evenings, when we can get everybody together, anyone who's a Mississippian comes to the deputation room later in the evening. And so there's a significant amount of camaraderie at that point. The other thing, the good thing about General Convention is it's 10 days and there are 2,000 people there. And the bad thing about General Convention is it's 10 days and there are 2,000 people there. So you've got to learn how to work through that There are a lot of events that we didn't have quite as many this past year, but I think they'll do it again in years ahead. But there are, like, I attended the Swanee dinner. So anyone who had any relationship with Swanee or other seminaries had their dinners on certain nights. And then we also were joined by the Episcopal Church women. That group had their meeting at the same time we did, and also the Daughters of the King had their meeting as we were ending. So it really is an opportunity to participate. And I have dear friends that I've done things with over the years. So as much as the legislation is important, and it's what we all seem to focus a lot of time on, I do want to say that there are other aspects of General Convention where all the Episcopalians in the country get together every 3 years, and it's a very worthwhile experience.
Yeah, thank you, Margaret. I appreciate that. And just want to reiterate all the times that we've said, hope that everyone watching this will consider being a deputy or an alternate by putting your name as a nominee at council the next time it comes around. I'm guessing that it will be what, 2020? Y'all help me out here. Anybody help me out here?
27.
27. Thank you. Thank you. I hate numbers. All right. So I do not see any questions coming through, but just want to re-emphasize that you are welcome to submit your questions to me or to the diocese. We're going to post this, and we want to make sure that at that point too, that any questions are welcome to the deputation about what we experienced and about the content of the resolutions and the legislation there at convention as well. So thank you again for joining us. I'm going to hit the stop button on the recording, and we are going to say goodbye to everyone. Y'all have a good night, and God bless.